This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 71 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about getting past travel anxiety. Now, a funny thing happened just now. I was looking back on the old episodes so that I could figure out how this episode about travel and anxiety is different from previous ones. And try as I might, I realised I can't find one. We actually haven't done an episode devoted to getting anxious about travel, which really surprised me. We've talked a bit about fear and stuff, but not about anxiety, and I am remiss in not getting to that by, until now, the 71st episode, because it's a topic I'm really keen to talk about more. I think it's important because there is a bunch of people out there who don't travel because they feel too anxious about it. And yet there's a lot of us travellers out there travelling, doing, all kinds of independent travel, and we have some anxieties about it, but we've found a way to get past them, or at least to realise that getting through that anxiety is worth it because the results are amazing. So anyway, sorry that we haven't had this earlier, but now here's an episode on getting past travel anxiety. So I am in some ways quite an anxious traveller. Back in my late teens, early 20s, I had some quite serious anxiety issues to the point where I could never have imagined getting on a plane over a couple of years there. And it never occurred to me, I didn't ever think, I'll never be able to travel again, something about it. I knew somehow I'd get through it, but certainly for a while I was quite debilitated by anxiety. So I can really relate to other people who say the same thing, but have somehow, like me, eventually got out there and travelled, and it's been really, really rewarding and certainly very confidence boosting as well. So I've got 3 guests today who have some really interesting tales to tell about travel anxiety. And the first one is Matt Treglia, who we've heard from before, and he and his girlfriend Marilyn are basically kind of digital nomads wandering the world these days. And he has just a really simple but I think kind of typical example of the kind of anxiety he faced when he lands in a new country.
When we first get to new countries, I'm just terrified just to go out and order food. I don't know why, but that is something I get like such anxiety for. I remember in Japan specifically, We've already been to like 3 countries where we lived in for a long period of time. And I remember like on the first day, Marilyn said to me, "Do you want to go get something to eat?" And I said, "Sure." So we were just walking around, and there was so many places we could have gone. Like we weren't in like the heart. We were in Osaka, but we were kind of in a more quiet neighborhood. So it wasn't like they weren't really English friendly. And it wasn't like they were catering to tourists or anything. It was basically just people who lived in that, Japanese people who lived in that neighborhood. So it was just like nerve-wracking because none of the they had the menus outside of the restaurants and nothing was in English. And it was our first day there, so we didn't know like what specific food to order or how to say it. We were kind of we just got there and we were winging it. And I don't know, something like that is just like makes me so nervous at first. But then as I eventually go into a restaurant and the people are super friendly and we just like point at the menu and laugh because they don't speak English and we don't speak Japanese, and we just kind of shrug our shoulders, and then we maybe point to someone's food at the next table, and then they bring us that. Like something as simple as that, like, is just expanding my comfort zone because I'm so nervous at first just to interact with anyone like that, or getting in a taxi and just telling them where to go because like when I first get there, because I don't know what anything is. I don't know the language. I don't know where anything is. I don't know where they're taking me. And it's just like kind of just getting accustomed to this new place I'm living is just gives me so much anxiety, but once it goes away, it's amazing. I mean, I'm living in a different country and I'm able to navigate and order food and do all these things. So it's just such a great feeling after that initial anxiety that, oh my God, I accomplished so much. Like I can navigate this city. Like I think it's amazing. Like my friend is currently in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and we lived there for over 7 months, and he was emailing me, and we were just talking, and I just knew of places in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Like I was just telling him like, oh, you should go here. This is on this neighborhood. Say this to these people. And it's just like in my mind, like, oh my God, like that's amazing. Like who would have thought I would ever be talking to my friend, telling him where to go in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. And
it's fabulous, isn't
like,
it?
Yeah, it's such a cool thing to have. I mean, like, I'll tell my friends and family that, and they're like, okay, like, big deal. But to me,
I totally get it.
Yeah, it's so cool.
It is really cool. Yeah, I mean, I've experienced exactly the same as you described. When you first get somewhere, those, very simple, seemingly simple, everyday kind of things are terrifying. And then within a few days or a few weeks or whatever, you've completely mastered that, or at least mastered it enough to be able to do it, without any anxiety. And that, like, it's amazing confidence boost, and it's kind of addictive. You just want to keep doing it, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. Like, I love that feeling of now going to a new city and a new country and just learning how to live there and being a local eventually. And I don't know, it's just amazing to me. Like we're going to Prague in the Czech Republic next, and it's just I don't really know what to expect. Like I've been doing research, but I know now that no matter how much research I do, it's just never enough once I get there. It's just totally different from what I expected. So I'm kind of just going in blind, and that's what I've been doing, and it works out fine each time, and it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to kind of take that leap and be prepared to stretch your comfort zone and know that it will work out in the end.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's very exciting. Yeah, it's really funny. I had exactly the same experience when I landed in Osaka, and I was working for a school, and so they'd already taken us to our apartment, but then we had to go out and find something to eat. And yeah, same thing, like not in a central, touristy area, and just looking at things, and I really don't know what to do or say or what these things are. And we went to what we thought was a supermarket and tried to find some food kind of things. And later on, I realised that it was a pharmacy that had a few snacks in it, but because I couldn't read anything, I just had no idea. And we ended up going, very shamefully, that first night, we ended up going to KFC and having fast food, which I could barely forgive myself over, because here I am in Japan. What am I doing having KFC? But now it's, and quickly after that it became no problem at all. So but yeah, that first experience is terrifying sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree. When you said that about KFC, when we first got to Thailand, like we were scared of crossing the street and talking to people and ordering food. So for like the first 3 days, we ordered pizza because we were so terrified of just doing anything. Yeah. And it was like, oh my God, is this it? Like, am I gonna just sit in my room and hide out and eat pizza every day? Like, this isn't how you travel. And eventually that went away. Yes. But yeah, at first, yeah, it's definitely scary no matter where you go.
When I was chatting with Matt, I could barely keep my mouth shut when he was explaining his experience in Osaka. I couldn't believe that we'd had basically the identical experience when we landed in Osaka. And I think landing in a country where you don't speak the language and where the culture is sort of significantly different from your home country or from places you've been before, I think that's likely to lead to more anxiety than usual, because we need to do those kind of basic things to survive, like get food. And sometimes it can be really tricky. I mean, I know it happened to me because I remember it very, very vividly. But now, having been back to Japan last year and getting ready to go again next year, I can't imagine that I could have felt so inadequate and so underprepared. I don't know. I can't imagine not being able to find a way to get my dinner, because now, I know enough Japanese and I know a lot about, what places serve what, and, I'm much more informed about it. So now it's not even scary in the slightest. It's only insanely exciting because I can't wait to get back there and eat some more amazing Japanese food. But yep, my first night in Osaka was horrifying in the food respect. So it's really interesting. I really loved how Matt was so enthusiastic about how much, about what you can accomplish by living in a foreign place and how much you learn and how much confidence that gives you. Because I think he captured really exactly how I feel about those same kind of experiences. So I know that there are people who have a lot of fear about landing in a foreign country and especially to travel independently there. But I really do believe that old line of feel the fear and do it anyway is really worth attempting. I think probably all the time, or certainly 99.9% of the time, you'll come out having had an amazing experience and learnt something and feeling kind of really empowered. So, yeah, I love that chat with Matt. Now, the next one I love too, back again, is Ian from the Barefoot Backpacker. He's popping up in a lot of episodes at the moment because we had a really long chat recently and he said so many interesting things. So he's back again. And we talked about when he is anxious when he travels, and it was a little bit different to how I am anxious when I travel, but it was very interesting.
So I've been sort of around the world. I've been to quite a few places. And most of my travel is solo travel. Mm-hmm. And you'd have thought that this means that I would be really self-confident and really sure of myself and have no worries. It's all lies.
Interesting.
Every single time I fly into somewhere new, even if it's somewhere I'm comfortable with and I've been before, I get a sinking feeling in my stomach going, oh my God, will I cope with this place? Will I just be able to speak to anyone? Will they understand me? Will they spend their time laughing at me behind my back because I'm the obvious foreigner? Will I be able to communicate successfully and go into a shop and buy things, or will I just be too shy and too nervous to even approach people? Will I spend my entire time locked myself in the dorm room going, I don't want to speak to anyone, I'm too scared, this is all too much for me? Mm-hmm. It very rarely happens, but it has. But it gets me every time. I'm always fearful about maybe I look to see what the worst that could happen is and act accordingly. But every single time I travel, it's kind of, will I be able to cope? Am I doing the right thing?
Now, I want to go back a bit. So you said the feeling is like kind of as you're arriving. So I have anxiety that comes and goes, and I used to have really bad anxiety, but now it tends to be in the lead up to a trip and just, the weeks before, and especially a couple of nights before I can't sleep, and I have all these, terrible, all the things that go wrong. But as soon as I get on the plane, it totally dissipates and I never think of it again. So is yours happens a little later than that, are you saying?
Mine happens roughly when the pilot says, you're coming into land, please fasten your seatbelts.
Wow. Interesting.
Because that's when it's the point at which I know we're about to arrive. Mm-hmm. And it continues until a point just after I arrive at my hostel, hotel, whatever.
Okay.
Part of it's mainly, I think, that very first interaction with the local country.
Right.
It's, can I cope with the initial stages, my first steps, the first time I need something, the first time I need to buy a bus ticket, the first time I need to make my way across town, the first time I need to buy something from a shop. It's that. Mm-hmm. I think once I do it the first time, it becomes slightly easier, but it's always that first time. It's always that, what do I do now aspect. It's the whole, this is all shiny, bright, new to me. Can I cope with it here? Right.
That's interesting. As you say it, I realise I do have, I do have that kind of anxiety, like kind of a low level feeling of that until I've had those kind of basic transactions in a new country, and then I do feel even better. But you're extremely well travelled, and especially when you're solo travelling, you do have to do all of these things on your own. So you've got a lot of experience doing it, but you still feel that every time.
Yes, pretty much.
Interesting. So
it's partly because nearly every time I go away somewhere new and somewhere different.
yes.
So even though I may have been somewhere similar before, I've not been to that place, I've not experienced that culture, I've not had to speak that, I would say not have to speak that language like I speak any other language.
You haven't had to deal with people who speak that language, or yeah.
I can get by in French, apparently.
Right. Yeah.
And what's also interesting about that is I've noticed that when I was in French-speaking West Africa, I was able to understand them much easier than to understand a native French person.
Oh, interesting. Yes. I don't really speak French at all, but knowing a few phrases helped a lot in Tunisia. But
yes.
I felt in France, no one seemed to understand me at all. So, yeah, I had the same experience. Interesting.
Weird, isn't it?
It is weird. Oh, that's really encouraging to hear. I know encouraging is a strange word, but encouraging to hear about that anxiety, because I know a lot of people who read my blog and haven't travelled much often have those like real fears that, what are they going to do? And they feel too fearful to even take the step. And I think it's always encouraging for them to hear that even really experienced travellers have these kinds of anxieties and fears. But it's still so worth doing that you just do it anyway.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
This chat with Ian really made me think more about my anxieties that are connected to travel and how I get past them, I suppose. Certainly the peak anxiety phase for me is shortly before I leave, a couple of days before usually. And the anxiety will differ according to what kind of trip it is. If it's a trip I'm taking with my son, then I'm worried about, will he be okay? Have I thought of everything that could go wrong? Will he be safe and okay? And if I'm traveling without him, it's kind of the same thing, but I'm stressing for, have I prepared to leave him behind, and will I be okay? Because it's hard as a mum to leave your kid somewhere while you're somewhere far away. It's not something I've done very often, but about once a year I do for work. And I always feel quite anxious about that. But usually most of the time once I'm on the plane, even just at the airport, that's enough. I'm done. And I also have kind of that anxiety of the last minuteness. I'm always struggling to get all the work done and get, everything organised. So getting to the airport then sort of signifies, okay, can chill out a bit now. But I surprise myself, reflecting on this conversation with Ian, there is that anxiety when I land somewhere new as well. But that's more just a very low level kind of, positive anxiety, not quite as bad as Ian describes his to be in that situation. But it just goes to show that, travellers, including very, very experienced independent and solo travellers too, can be anxious about various parts of their trip. I'm sure all of us are anxious about some part of travelling because it's out of the norm and away from your comfort zone. So I think it's a good reminder to people who feel anxious about some kind of trip that we all get it and it's really worth having a go. So I think you nearly always come out better off from a trip, even or maybe especially if you're a bit worried about it. Now, my final guest today is Kristen Truempy, and she is the psychologist who I interviewed a couple of episodes ago as well. And we were chatting about the kind of things that can make you, highly anxious, the kind of experiences you might have that make you highly anxious when you travel. And she had some really interesting stuff to say, as always.
I think it really depends on how you want to lead your life. I think, and I don't mean that in a... I think sometimes these things can come off as very cold, and I don't mean it in that way. I just think of things as, there are fears and anxieties which I feel there is no value in overcoming them. All right. So for example, bungee jumping. Most of us do not live in a context where the skill of jumping off a bridge is needed.
Yes.
On a regular basis, right? So if that freaks you out, if you feel like, that I am curious about it, and you have like that's, a little bit of apprehension, but you're terrified of it, well, maybe you can, slowly somehow try to convince yourself to do it. But if you just have no interest in doing it, I see no value in putting energy into overcoming that, right? Mm-hmm. But if you are afraid of heights, right? And if you're afraid of just crossing a regular bridge in your city, things are different, because that is a fear that will just limit you wherever you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that I think is really important, that we kind of think about it. All right, so is this fear an isolated fear, something that barely ever happens? Well, in that case, who cares? Focus on your strengths and have an interesting time growing, doing the things that you're good at, that give you energy and that you love anyway. Like, why bother doing something like that? But if it's something that just is mildly terrifying, but you have this thought that, well, maybe it could be rewarding, then I think there is a lot of value of trying it out. You know, I come up often with a simple example that lets people to stay at home. You can stay at home, you can do this in your city, is singing karaoke. It's something that terrifies the most people, right? Terrified me too. Oh my God, it was so scary. I remember, like, you start shaking and you're just like, oh my God, I'm going to be so bad. And blah, blah, blah. But then once you do it, like now, that skill, I would argue that, like, being able to be comfortable on a karaoke stage has just liberated me to be comfortable in like 500 other situations. That I think that we have to be really think about, okay, where are we willing to put that investment in? Because let's be honest, dealing with our anxieties is not exactly fun, right? So I think a lot of times there is this overemphasis on things that we can't do well, right? So we can be perfectly functioning human beings, but like whatever it is that you are either terrified of or you can't do, that's apparently the most important thing in the whole world. So
rarely
I think
true.
That can be exactly. So that can be the kind of mindset where I think that's just sad, because you will kind of, you know, struggle all your life doing things that at best you could get mediocre at. And that's just frankly sad to me, because I don't see the point. Like, there are already a lot of people who do that well, fine. But then if there's something where you're like, wait a minute, if I overcome this, I have access to so many more important, rewarding things, then it's worth it.
Yeah. Wow, that's fabulous. And what you say makes absolute sense to me. It sounds so logical. I'm certainly the person for which bungee jumping is just not an option. I'm not like, I absolutely don't see the point. And just occasionally I start to think, oh, you know, maybe I'm just not adventurous enough. Maybe I should push myself. But I do lots of other things. I'm just not that physically adventurous kind of person. And you've made me feel like that's okay. So that is fabulous. Thank you. And karaoke, I totally agree. So I lived in Japan for a couple of years, and you can't live in Japan and not do karaoke. But
no, you can't.
Absolutely, it's sort of compulsory. But I very vividly remember the first few times that I was kind of dragged along very unwillingly by colleagues and friends, and I thought, oh, I'm never going to sing. Oh, I'm never going to do this. And yeah, over time, I managed to do that. And it's so true that's I'm not getting up to sing very often, but I do get up on a lot of stages and speak. And having been able to sing in front of others, certainly speaking is much easier than that. So, yeah, that's a great example. Fabulous. So it's okay if I don't ever go bungee jumping? You've given me permission to not do that?
Absolutely, Amanda. Never go bungee jumping in your life unless it calls you suddenly.
Yes. Who knows what? Yes, you never know what the future may bring, but so far I have definitely not been called by bungee jumping. My biggest takeaway from that chat with Kristen was to kind of identify which things you're anxious about that are worth tackling. For example, when you travel, well, many years ago when I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, getting on a plane was something I thought I couldn't do. But especially when you live in Western Australia, to see anywhere, you really have to get in a plane. It's not, I suddenly can't just decide to take trains everywhere because I won't see much of the world in that way from Western Australia. So it was an anxiety that I decided I had to deal with, and I gradually did. And I had some very, very stressful flights, but I got there. Whereas my fear of bungee jumping, or the anxiety that the idea of bungee jumping induces in me, Kristen's given me permission to not have to bother bungee jumping in my future. So there you go. I'm not even going to consider it again. There you go. I feel much better about that. So anyway, I hope that these examples of travellers who have dealt with some travel anxiety help you out. I'm curious to hear what things you might be anxious about when you travel, or if indeed there's a trip or a destination or something you've been avoiding because of travel anxiety. So hop over to the Facebook group, look for Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook, or just have a look in the link in the show notes as well. And join up and let us know what's made you anxious on your travels. I'm curious to know. As always, I'd love to say big thanks to my guests today, and you can find them all around the web. You can find Matt's Words With Winos podcast in your podcast player, or go to wordswithwinos.com. You can find Ian at the Barefoot Backpacker, and his website is barefoot-backpacker.com. Or you can find him on Instagram, barefoot_backpacker. And you can find Kristen's podcast, which is the Positive Psychology podcast, in your podcast player, or look up her website, strengthsphoenix.com/listen. And of course, as always, I will put links to all of that and more in the show notes. And the show notes for today will be at notaballerina.com/71. 71 sounds like a big number, goodness me. You can also catch up with me on Twitter at Amanda Kendall and use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod. I'm very keen to hear more stories of travel anxiety. I'd love to do another episode on it in the future, because I can't believe this is the first one, really. So I don't know how that happened. So please do get in touch and tell me what your stories are about travel anxiety. Thanks so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.